Adapted from archaic translation by Robert Chalmers. Jataka number 101. Parosata-Jātaka. Far better than 100 fools, though they think hard 100 years unceasingly, is one who, hearing, straightway understands. This story is in all respects analogous to the Parosahassa-Jataka, with the sole difference that think hard is read here. Source. Adapted from archaic translation by Robert Chalmers. Jataka number 102. Pannika-Jataka. He that should prove. This story was told by the master while at Jetavana monastery, about a lay brother who was a greengrocer in Shravasti city and made a living by the sale of various roots and vegetables, and pumpkins and the like. Now he had a pretty daughter who was as good and virtuous as she was pretty, but was always laughing. And when she was asked in a marriage by a family of his own area, he thought she should be married, but she's always laughing. And a bad girl married into a strange family is her parents' shame. I must find out for certain whether she is a good girl or not. So one day he made his daughter take a basket and come with him to the forest to gather herbs. Then to try her, he took her by the hand with whispered words of love. Straightway the girl burst into tears and began to cry out that such a thing would be as monstrous as fire rising out of water, and she pleaded him to desist. Then he told her that his only intent was to try her, and asked whether she was virtuous. And she stated that she was, and that she had never looked on any man with eyes of love. Calming her fears and taking her back home, he made a feast and gave her in marriage. Then feeling that he should go and pay his respects to the master, he took perfumes and garlands in his hand and went to Jetavana monastery. His salutations done and offerings made, he seated himself near the master, who observed that it was a long time since his last coming. Then the man told the Lord Buddha the whole story. "She has always been a good girl," said the master. "You have put her to the test now just as you did in days gone by." Then at the greengrocer's request he told this story of the past. Once upon a time when Brahmadatta was reigning in Benares, the Bodhisattva was a tree fairy in a forest. And a lay follower who was a greengrocer of Benares had just the same doubts of his daughter, and all fell out as in the introductory story. And as her father took hold of her hand, the weeping girl repeated these verses. "He that should prove my buckler strong. My father works me this wrong. Sad in thickest wood I cry. My helper proves my enemy." Then her father calmed her fears, and asked whether she was a virgin. And when she stated that she was, he brought her home and made a feast and gave the girl in marriage. His story ended, the master preached the four truths, at the close of which the greengrocer was established in the first path of salvation. Then the faster identified the birth by saying, "The father and daughter of today were the father and daughter in the story, and I the tree fairy who saw the scene." Source. Adapted from archaic translation by Robert Chalmers. Jataka number 103. Very Jataka. If wise, you, loiter not. This story was told by the master at Jetavana monastery about Anantha-Pindika. For we hear that Anantha-Pindika was returning from the village of which he was headman, when he saw robbers on the road. "It won't do to loiter by the way," thought he. "I must hurry on to Shravasti city." So he urged his oxen to speed and got safely into Shravasti city. Next day he went to the monastery and told the master what had happened to him. "Sir," said the master, "in other times too the wise and good saw robbers on the road and moved fast without delay to their homes." Then at the merchant's request he told this story of the past. Once upon a time when Brahmadatta was reigning in Benares, the Bodhisattva was a rich merchant, who had been to a village to collect his dues and was on his homeward way when he saw robbers on the road. At once he urged his oxen to their topmost speed and reached home in safety. And as he sat on his couch of state after a rich meal, he exclaimed, "I have escaped from the robber's hand to mine own house, where fear dwells not." And in his thankfulness he uttered this stanza. If wise, you should loiter not amidst enemies. A night or two with such brings miseries. So, from the fullness of his heart, spoke the Bodhisattva, and after a life of charity and other good deeds he passed away to fare according to his deeds. His story ended, the master identified the birth by saying, I was the merchant of Benares of those days. Source. Adapted from archaic translation by Robert Chalmers. Jataka number 104. Pannika-Jataka. From 4 to 8. This story was told by the master while at Jetavana monastery, concerning an unruly brother. The incidents are the same as those in the previous story of Pannika, but belong to the days of the Buddha Kashyapa. Now at that time one of the damned who had put on the circlet and was suffering the tortures of hell, asked the Bodhisattva, Lord, what sin have I committed? The Bodhisattva detailed the man's evil deeds to higher and uttered this stanza. From 4 to 8, to 16 from there, and so. To 32 insatiate greed did go. Still pressing on till insatiety did win the circlet's gritting misery. So saying he went back to the realm of devas, but the other dwelling in hell till his sin had been purged from him. Then he passed from there to fare according to his deeds. His lesson ended, the master identified the birth by saying, this unruly brother was then Pannika and I the Deva. Source. Adapted from archaic translation by Robert Chalmers. Jataka number 105. Parosata-Jataka. Fearst you the wind? This story was told by the master while at Jetavana monastery, about a brother who lived in a perpetual state of nervous alarm. We learn that he came of a good family in Shravasti city, and was led to give up the world by hearing the truth preached, and that he was always in fear of his life both by night and by day. The sough of the wind, the rustle of a fan, or the cry of bird or beast would inspire him with such abject terror that he would shriek and dash away. He never thought that death was sure to come upon him. Though, had he practiced meditation on the certainty of death, he would not have feared it. For only they that do not so meditate fear death. Now his constant fear of dying became known to the brethren. And one day they met in the hall of truth and fell to discussing his fearfulness and the correctness of every brother's taking death as a theme for meditation. Entering the hall, the master asked, and was told, what they were discussing. So he sent for that brother and asked him whether it was true he lived in fear of death. The brother confessed that he did. Be not angry, brethren, said the master, with this brother. The fear of death that fills his breast, now was no less strong in past times. So saying he told this story of the past. Once upon a time when Brahmadatta was reigning in Benares, the Bodhisattva was a tree fairy near the Himalayas. And in those days the king put his state elephant in the elephant trainer's hands to be trained in to stand firm. And they tied the elephant up fast to a post, and with prods in their hands set about training the animal. Unable to bear the pain while he was being made to do their asking, the elephant broke the post down, put the trainers to flight, and made off to the Himalayas. And the men, being unable to catch it, had to come back empty-handed. The elephant lived in the Himalayas in constant fear of death. A breath of wind sufficed to fill him with fear and to start him off at full speed, shaking his trunk to and fro. And it was with him as though he was still tied to the post to be trained. All happiness of mind and body gone, he wandered up and down in constant dread. Seeing this, the tree fairy stood in the fork of his tree and uttered this stanza. Fear you the wind that ceaselessly the rotten branches did rip always? Such fear will waste you quite away. Such were the tree fairy's cheering words. And the elephant from then on feared no more. His lesson ended, the master taught the four truths, at the close of which the brother entered the paths, and identified the birth by saying, this brother was the elephant of those days and I the tree fairy. Source. Adapted from archaic translation by Robert Chalmers. Jataka number 106. Pannika-Jataka. A happy life was mine. This story was told by the master while at Jetavana monastery, about a temptation by a fat girl. The incident will be told in the Pannika-Jataka in the 13th book. On asking the brother, the master was told that it was true he was in love, and in love with the fat girl. "Brother," said the master, "she is leading you astray. So too in times gone by she led you into evil, and you were only restored to happiness by the wise and good of those days." So saying, he told this story of the past. Once upon a time when Brahmadatta was reigning in Benares, those things came to pass which will be told in the Khuddaka. But on this occasion the bodhisattva at evening came with fruits to the hermitage, and, opening the door, said to his son, "Every other day you brought wood and food, and lit a fire. Why have you not done any of these things today, but sit sadly here week and away?" "Father," said the young man, "while you were away gathering fruits, there came a woman who tried to lure me away with blandishments. But I would not go with her till I had your leave, and so left her sitting waiting for me. And now my wish is to depart." Finding that the young man was too much in love to be able to give her up, the bodhisattva asked him to go, saying, "But when she wants meat or fish or ghee or salt or ride or any such thing to eat, and sends you hurrying to and fro on her jobs, then remember this hermitage and flee away back to me." So the other went off with the woman to the habitations of men. And when he was come to her house, she made him run about to fetch every single thing she wanted. "I might just as well be her slave as this," thought he, and promptly ran away back to his father, and saluting him, stood and repeated this stanza. "A happy life was mine till that fell she. That worrying, tiresome pitcher styled my wife. Set me to run the jobs of her whims." And the bodhisattva commended the young man, and encouraged him to kindliness and mercy, setting on the 4 forms of right feeling towards men and the modes of ensuring insight. Nor was it long before the young man won the knowledges and attainments, and attained to right feeling towards his fellow creatures, and with his father was reborn into the Brahma realm. His lesson ended, and the 4 truths preached entered the first path. The master identified the birth by saying, "The fat girl of today was also the fat girl of those days. This yoking brother was the son, and I the father of those days."